Hello, Aubrey. How's it going today?
I'm great, Lindsay. How are you?
Excellent. Aubrey, how do you learn new vocabulary when you're learning a new language, like maybe French or something brand new? How do you acquire
Great
new
question.
words? Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like I have done this incorrectly, and then it's been sort of um, trial and error trying to find better methods, right? I used to
Sure.
try to memorize long lists of vocabulary and
Uh,
found that doesn't work, right? I wasn't ever able to really use them in conversation when I was trying to speak.
yeah.
So now I'm excited for all the tips we're going to give you today because this is also how I add vocabulary, a lot
Yeah.
of the advice we're going to give today.
Yeah. I mean, this is a question that our listeners are asking themselves all the time. But when it comes to
Mhm.
IELTS prep, um the risk goes higher if we're not
Right, the
learning those
stakes
new
are
the
higher.
stakes are higher. That's the word I was
Yes.
looking for. The stakes
Yes,
get higher,
exactly.
Aubrey. All
Right,
right.
because for a lot of us, if we are learning to travel, we are learning for
Mhm.
fun, right? It's the stakes aren't as high, but for you, preparing to pass IELTS,
Yes.
adding high scoring vocabulary is vital.
Vital,
And
yeah.
it is if you are making that mistake of trying to learn long lists of vocabulary,
Mhm.
that's not effective, right? There are definitely better ways to do this.
All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and read the listener question, which was the inspiration for today's episode. Are you ready, Aubrey?
Yes,
Here it is.
absolutely.
I took the IELTS UKVI in 2020. I scored band 6 in speaking, 4.5 in reading, 5 in listening, and 5.5 in writing. My overall score was band 5.5. My vocabulary is weak. What should I do? Looking for your advice. And this is from Hidayatollah, and asked in one of our amazing IELTS webinars. All right, good.
Yes, such a great question. And I understand that frustration, especially if you are looking for a sevens, an overall
Mhm.
seven, to be scoring 5.5.
Yes.
And sometimes you do recognize where the weakness is. Hedayatullah recognizes her vocabulary is not strong enough. She's getting low vocabulary scores. So I'm excited to dive into this today and to answer for them and for all of you what you should be doing to build
Yeah.
vocabulary for IELTS.
Yeah, because sometimes the key to that 7 or higher is just simply habits and what you're doing every week, every day to prepare. We all have the same amount of time, maybe 30 days or 60 days, but what are you doing? How are you filling that time? So, in the meantime, go ahead and hit the follow button right here on IELTS Energy, right, Aubrey?
Absolutely. We have 2 new episodes every week with strategies and tips for IELTS preparation and also vocabulary,
Mhm.
everything you need to know about the IELTS exam. So be sure to hit follow right here on IELTS Energy.
All right. So, what is our advice then? How can we find new vocabulary?
Yeah. So the first thing is you must be keeping a vocabulary notebook. This
Mhm.
can be online on an Excel spreadsheet. It could also be a handwritten notebook, whatever works best for you.
Mhm.
But we are going to give 3 tips today of how you should be using this notebook, what you should be adding to the notebook, because you might be tracking vocabulary you're learning, but finding it's not working. So some of these tips today, you might realize, I should be doing that instead. That might help.
Okay, let's do it. So, the first thing we're going to do is organize by topic, right, Aubrey?
Exactly, right? And you
Mhm.
should be adding 4 to 5 words for every 30 minutes of reading or listening. If you read
Mhm.
a news article, 30 minutes of a novel, you're, watching a TV show, listening to a podcast for
Mhm.
about 30 minutes, aim for 4 to 5 words. You are likely going to hear so many more words than that are new, that are unfamiliar. You need to be strategic about which 4 or 5 words would potentially be most useful on IELTS and stick to that, right? If you
Yeah.
make a list of 100 words for every
Oh my
podcast you
gosh.
listen to, you won't learn any of them.
That's why on our iOS Android app, we only choose 6 or 7 words in every episode
Yes.
because it's just impossible for the brain, and there is a tendency students want to know all the words, but that won't
Right.
get you anywhere because it'll be a very thin understanding of each word, right?
Exactly, right? And you must be intentional about which words you add.
Mhm.
Less common words are higher scoring. So often it's not even about extremely difficult words that no one has heard of.
Mhm.
It's just what are students not using as often.
Yeah.
So, for example, we'll talk about how these very common words like good, bad, are
Mhm.
band 4, 5 because they're so common and there are higher scoring alternatives. So if you're reading and you hear an interesting alternative to one of those, if it's not
Mhm.
in your notebook, that's an ideal word because it's definitely going to be used on IELTS.
Yes, and when we're looking for these words, we wanna look for general vocabulary, but also topic-specific words, and we wanna look at what are the most common topics on the test, right, Aubrey?
Exactly, right? So you definitely need to be reading the news. You need to be reading articles about the medical field, the environment, a lot of these topics that come up on all the time on IELTS
Mhm.
because you must have topic specific vocabulary,
Mhm.
right? So if you are just listening to pop culture podcasts, for example, those are not going to have the kind of vocabulary you need for the task 2 essays you'll likely have to write about.
Okay, so we're looking for a variety of input, different topics, different kinds of podcasts. There is a podcast about everything. It's amazing.
Exactly, right? So it might not be what you are the most interested in, but
Mhm.
for now, because you're studying for IELTS, you have to be intentional about pulling in information topics, lots of different things so that you can get the vocabulary to write about all of these things.
Yes, I love it. All right, so go ahead and add those 4 to 5 words, no more than that, right, Aubrey? We don't wanna have a huge list. We want it to be manageable. What's number 2? What's the second strategy?
Yeah. So these words you're adding to your vocabulary notebook, yes, add them by topic. You need to have all of the most common topics for IELTS, add them so you can keep them organized, but you want to add them in context, right?
Okay.
Include the sentence you heard them in with a simple definition. A
Mhm.
synonym is extremely helpful. And
Mhm.
then immediately write another sentence that applies to you personally. Write it
Mm.
in a sentence that has something to do with your life or your experience. This is going to cement the meaning more in your life and the context in which this vocabulary is used. So, we're
Yes.
going to give an example here, but this is going to avoid one of the biggest mistakes students make, which is to learn vocabulary and then accidentally use it out of context on either
Oh, yeah.
IELTS speaking or writing. You
Mhm.
can't just learn words from the thesaurus, they all have their own specific meanings.
Yep, and this will help you by making it about you. I mean, we all have ourselves as kind of our point of reference. It is how it is. Make it about
Exactly.
your life and you, so it doesn't. So it's not just memorizing a definition and then taking kind of a
Exactly.
static version of that word that may not be correct. Okay.
Right? Make it personal, right? This will definitely access your brain box. It'll help you access everything else you know that's related to this word, other synonyms. So let's give an example here, Lindsay.
Yeah.
What if you saw in a book, right? You're studying for IELTS and you
Mhm.
see she had a preternatural sense of timing. Ooh,
Oh.
that's a band 9 word right there.
I know, that's not in my vocabulary, Aubrey. That's a
Nice.
great that's a great word. I mean, the idea here, based on the context, right? I'm imagining the meaning is that it's beyond what is normal or natural. It's something exceptional
Exactly.
or uncanny. Okay.
Exactly, right? So that is the meaning of this. And often when you hear a word like this on a podcast, on a news article, you may need to quickly look up the definition.
Sure.
Luckily, this is really quick to do now on a computer if you're not familiar with the meaning. So you
Mhm.
would write that sentence you heard it in, right? If you heard on the podcast this, you could write that.
Mhm.
And then a quick definition. If you know the meaning of uncanny, you can just write that. But if
Yes.
not, write this, above or beyond what is normal or natural. And then you
Mhm.
can write the synonym uncanny. So it's good
Yes.
to have a couple of other words that will also help you when you're referring to your vocabulary notebook to quickly see the synonym and recall what it means. But
Yes.
then if I were to add this to my vocabulary notebook, I would add a sentence that's related to me. Maybe I would
Mhm.
write, as a mother, I often have a preternatural intuition about what my children are up to. So
Oh,
this almost
yeah.
means similar to supernatural, right? Just beyond or
Mhm.
above what is normal or natural.
And that just makes it so much more personal. And what is personal, we learn better. Okay. So
Absolutely.
that's huge. I love this idea. And that's a great example. Make it something that you feel strongly about, that really identifies you as a person. Okay. Tie
Yes,
it into your
included
identity. Yeah.
in a sentence that you might actually use on the IELTS exam, right? If
Hmm.
you're going to get personal questions on the speaking exam. So if you include vocabulary in sentences that are related to you, you might end up using that actual sentence to answer a speaking question.
I love it. So good. Okay, Aubrey, we are back now. So we've talked about what we're going to do, right? We're going to grab 4 to 5 words every 30 minutes, and then we're going to add the words into a context that actually means something to us in our identities. What would be the third thing we need to do?
Yeah. So, third and most important is to use the vocabulary right away and often,
Okay.
right? So, the first thing you can do is whatever you just read or heard, you're going to summarize it and use these 4 or 5 words. So, like, imagine sort of a paragraph summary. You could
Mhm.
write it first and then say it out loud and
Okay.
include all of the words that you added to your vocabulary notebook.
Love it. And then we're going to use it in speaking practice answers, right? We're going to start to use it in practice tests and essays. Yeah.
Exactly, right? Because if you have a vocabulary notebook full of amazing words, you have taken all this time to add that vocabulary, but then you aren't proactive about adding them to your active vocabulary,
Hmm.
using them in practice speaking answers, adding them to essays, you will arrive on test day and you won't be able to access them. You don't have your vocabulary notebook in front of you there. You
Yes.
have to be ready with all of those cemented in your brain. And that you have to be very intentional about.
Yes. Any other steps around using the vocabulary right away?
Yeah. So, one thing you want to keep the vocabulary that you are sort of currently adding to your active vocabulary list
Mhm.
manageable.
Okay.
So, as you are mastering this vocabulary, once you
Hmm.
are able to use words without referring to your vocabulary notebook,
Hmm.
and you're confident about it, you want to remove them, right? Highlight, cross it off, figure out a way to keep that updated so it's very
Hmm.
clear to you which words you're still working on adding.
Right. And of course, as we're crossing off words because we understand them, we need to come back to using them, right? To remind ourselves so we don't lose them. This is a big piece, with online courses. I think sometimes people feel like they might learn something and then forget it, right? Later on in the
Absolutely.
course. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to be proactive about continuing to use all of this vocabulary right up to test day,
Love
right?
it.
So then when you go to write an essay, whatever the topic is, you have all of that vocabulary at your disposal. That's what you
Hmm.
need.
So good. So between these 3 tips, I mean, this is the way to do it. It's not magic, guys. This is the way to use everyday consumption of podcasts or books, grab vocabulary words, and then make them yours. It does take kind of being a leader for your own learning, in a sense. That's what's required here, Aubrey. Don't you think?
Absolutely, right? You're going to need to stay organized about it and be very intentional,
Yeah.
right? So if you have found yourself making some of these mistakes of just creating long vocabulary lists, trying to memorize, and you feel like it's not working, you go
Hmm.
to answer a question or write an essay and you're not able to use much of that vocabulary without referring to your notes. Try today's tips instead. Change your process, and this will help you add high scoring vocabulary to your active vocabulary.
Yes, I love it. And if you're looking for a shortcut, we do give you a lot of the words inside 3 Keys IELTS, inside our course, Aubrey, that will get you that band 7 or higher. Not all the words. You still need a vocabulary notebook to build additional vocab, but we give you some very high scoring ones that give you a huge advantage because the course was designed based on examiner experience, Aubrey.
Yes, that's such a good point. This is sort of a fast track, right?
Yeah.
Imagine this is going to take you a lot of time to be listening to podcasts, reading the news. So you can skip some of that time if you are short on time for practicing IELTS. We have compiled a lot of these high scoring words with the definition, the example sentences that you can start immediately adding to practice answers and essays. A lot of the words that are going to be useful on pretty much every IELTS exam.
I love it. So to get into our course, guys, go over to allearsenglish.com/KEYS. Check it out over there. And Aubrey, I'll see you back here later this week. All right. Have a
Awesome.
good day.
Yes. See you next time.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.